The Postcode Lottery Green Challenge. A global search for the best green business plan. The most prestigious competition for social entrepreneurs.
I'm very happy to hear that the Postcode Lottery launched the Green Challenge. Together, we can turn the tide of global warming.
For the 6th year in a row, the Postcode Lottery is searching for products and services that will contribute to an eco-friendly lifestyle and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
We need to do something before it's too late.
The need is there, and I think the business case is solid.
We can produce electricity with living plants.
A clean cooking, heating, and electricity solution for 2.5 billion of the world's poorest people.
And all of the generations to come can access solar energy in a more sustainable and optimized way.
As in previous years, the winner will not only take home 500,000 euros, they will also get expert coaching and help in bringing their idea to market.
It takes pioneers like yourselves to bring this kind of change to scale. I personally applaud you all. Good luck.
This year, looking for the next bright idea. The Postcode Lottery Green Challenge. Act now.
Smallholder farmers produce half the world's food. Most of them are women. Of all those affected by climate change, we are the majority. Rich nations are historically responsible for the climate crisis, yet the burden is falling on developing countries. Within the next 10 years, African smallholder farmers who depend on rainfall could see their harvest drop by as much as 50%. Leaders, take action to meet the needs of poor countries and smallholder farmers. Support women farmers. Let's fight climate change and hunger together.
Right behind me, there are 26 teams of students. And what they're doing is working together to create recommendations for what a strategy for addressing global energy issues might be over the next century.
Our goal is to prevent a temperature rise of more than 2 degrees over 100 years.
So each of the teams is sitting with a simulator called En-ROADS. And what it allows you to do is really, really fast see what the long-term implications of various strategies would be. They're working at laptops, plugging in different parameters, different variables to see which would be the approach that would be the best in the long term.
That cheaper cost also includes, building an entire new power plant.
What if we have a breakthrough of renewable energy? What if we have energy efficiency? What if we have a carbon price?
So there's some things that we thought might have a huge impact on the energy mix or ultimately emissions, carbon emissions, that are really not having much of an impact at all.
Just dramatically increasing solar usage doesn't solve the problem. Dramatically decreasing coal doesn't solve the problem.
And I say over the next 20 years, which will cover the lifetime of all the coal-burning power plants, it declines to zip, like that.
I like that.
Like that.
And each of the groups is going to be producing a set of recommendations that they'll then present to their peers and then to a set of Stanford faculty to see which is the best approach.
We really liked all of them, and so I will say that the winner is how do you like these curves?
I feel great. It was very unexpected. I mean, we put a lot of thought into this, but we're very excited.
I was surprised by how difficult it was to lower the temperature.
So I think it was kind of a wake-up call that, we have to start working on this, because the longer we wait, the more unrealistic the solutions will have to be. So I think it kind of added a sense of urgency.
Thank the organizers of PopTech for giving me this opportunity. It's indeed a great privilege to be here. And I particularly value the choice of the theme that you've come up with this year, because I really think we should look at the whole issue of balancing several factors that have been influenced by human activities, and those in turn influence human activities today and will do so tomorrow. But while thanking them, let me also register a complaint, and that's the fact that I'm following President Grimson. I mean, that's a very hard act to follow. So that's highly unfair. But I can also say that I'm carrying a heavy sense of guilt because I was in New Haven last week, and I flew from here to Ethiopia because I had to go for an important event in Africa. And then I've flown all the way here, reaching here late last night around midnight. So I've got a terrible carbon footprint which just keeps accumulating. And people often ask me, and I'm sure someone from the audience will ask me later, what do you do about your carbon footprint? And the two responses I give is, well, first, in my own personal life, other than flying, I do try to minimize whatever demands I might have as a human being that would have an impact on carbon dioxide emissions. And secondly, since I was born a Hindu, I can believe in my next reincarnation when I'll try to do something about my carbon footprint. But I want to tell you about some of the results of the work of the IPCC, which I think certainly would make us ponder on how we might be able to rebalance some of the activities, some of the impacts that we have created on the Earth's climate as human beings. I also would like to mention the fact that we clearly have to take a long-term view of this. Of course, that doesn't mean that we can escape by not taking action in the immediate future. So let me get into some results that I'd like to project for you. And I'll start by showing you this particular diagram, which shows you the changes in greenhouse gases from I-score and modern data. And you know, this I-score data, for instance, is being collected in Greenland, and I've been there. It's a remarkable experience because Greenland, as you know, is the largest island on this earth, apart from Australia, which is a continent by itself. And you have a huge mountain of ice covering that piece of land, which is about 3 kilometers high on the average. And as you go deeper and deeper, you're mining ice cores that go back in time, and they give you a remarkable signature of what the state of physical and chemical variables were at that point of time, a long, long while ago. Now, this is a figure that you might have seen in Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, or those of you who've seen the movie. But to dramatize the sharp increase that you see over here in recent years, in recent decades, he gets onto an elevator, and they haven't provided me one over here. So I'm afraid you'll just have to take your eyes along this steep increase that you find over here. I won't be able to follow it physically by going up. What I also want to tell you is that the atmospheric concentrations of some of these greenhouse gases have increased at a very rapid rate. Now, in the case of carbon dioxide, it's largely due to fossil fuel use and deforestation that we've had an increase in carbon dioxide concentrations and emissions. And in the case of methane and oxides of nitrogen, it's essentially agricultural, pastoral, and animal-related activities that are responsible. Of course, President Grimson told us about the volcanic eruption, and when volcanoes erupt, it has the opposite effect. So that was quite apart from all the renewable energy that Iceland uses. They also mitigated emissions of greenhouse gases by spewing out this huge quantity of volcanic material that he described a little while ago. However, what I'd like to say is that there's reason for concern because the rate at which the emissions of greenhouse gases is increasing is really much faster than we've seen in the past. I also want to mention the fact that between 1970 and 2004, there's been a 70% increase in emissions of greenhouse gases. So in a sense, you could conclude that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is really not being implemented effectively. And that convention, as you're aware, came into existence in 1992. Let me tell you what the projections indicate in terms of specific scenarios of economic, political, demographic changes that the Earth is going to witness in the future. If you look at the range that we've projected in our fourth assessment report, you get something ranging from 1.1 degrees Celsius to 6.4 degrees Celsius increase by the end of the century. Now, it's important to remember that during the 20th century, we had an average increase of 0.74 degrees Celsius. With this range, clearly, you can't focus on what might really happen, so we did much further analysis and came up with two what we call best estimates. At the lower end, the best estimate was 1.8 degrees Celsius. At the upper end, it was 4 degrees Celsius. Now, if you take even the 1.8 degrees Celsius increase, add that to the 0.74 degrees that took place in the last century, you have an increase of over 2.5 degrees Celsius. And as you know, the negotiations that are going on at the international level under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change have clearly now reached an agreement of sorts that we are going to limit temperature increase to about 2 degrees Celsius. Now, I'll say a little more about that, but I also want to tell you that if you're talking about rebalancing the climate of the Earth, then really speaking, it was 125,000 years ago that you had temperatures higher than what we are seeing today. And this, of course, led to sea level rise of 4 to 6 meters. I'm not for a moment suggesting that the same thing will happen now, but clearly, if you look at historical geological information, this is where we were earlier. And paleoclimatic information supports the interpretation that the warmth of the last half century is unusual in at least the previous 1,300 years. So therefore, we are doing something to the climate of this Earth, and we came to two very important conclusions that firstly, that warming of the climate system is unequivocal, and secondly, that most of the warming that had taken place since the middle of the last century was on account of increase in anthropogenic or human-induced concentrations of greenhouse gases. There are also going to be other impacts of climate change on water resources, for instance. Countries like Bangladesh, China, and India are particularly vulnerable in this regard. And in the case of India, you've got numbers which show you that by 2050, the per capita availability of water would be about 2/3 of what we have today. And this is happening largely because of the rapid melting of glaciers and glacial runoff and frequency of glacial lake outbursts. This can lead to another set of problems, which would be essentially mud flows, avalanches, and so on, which are already on the increase. So the entire water cycle, in a sense, is being affected by the impacts of climate change. We also know that there are extremely serious impacts on agriculture. I was in Ethiopia just 4 days ago, and one major concern, there were a number of leaders from all over Africa at that major conference, which was essentially about development and climate change. And one major concern, which of course is something we substantiated in our fourth assessment report, was the fact that in some countries of Africa, as early as 2020, you might get a decline of 50% in the yields of some crops. Now, these are farmers who are dependent on rain-fed agriculture, and clearly, they're not producing any of their crops essentially for the market. Most of it is for self-consumption, so that they can keep body and soul together. And if there's going to be a decline in yields, as we have projected, this has major implications for food security on that continent. Have I done something wrong? There's something on the screen. Well, PopTech is a little too technological for me, so Anyway, let me continue. What I'd like to also mention is that there would be major impacts on human health. And this is essentially because of a number of factors. Firstly, thank you very much. Firstly, because there would be malnutrition with implications for child growth and development, deaths, disease, and injury due to heat waves, floods, storms, fires, droughts. One important conclusion we came up with is that there is already an increase in the frequency and in some cases the intensity of floods, droughts, heat waves, extreme precipitation events, and as a result of heat waves, you also have many more forest fires and so on. There would also be deaths, disease, and injury on account of some of these extreme events, and diarrheal diseases on the increase, and of course, frequency of cardiorespiratory diseases is also going up based on records that we have. So health would be impacted by climate change, but another possibility, and this is not something that we're making as a projection, but it's clearly a possibility that you could have a major loss of ice sheets in areas like Greenland and West Antarctica, which, if they were to occur, would be abrupt and irreversible and can lead to sea level rise of several meters. We also carried out assessment of species, and we found that a temperature increase of anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius can lead to the threat of extinction of species to the extent of 20 to 30% of the species that we actually carried out an assessment of. We know that 25 to 40% of the mammal species in national parks in sub-Saharan Africa will become endangered. And also as a result of the meridional overturning circulation being affected, and this is essentially what you call the Gulf Stream, and you see the flow of this stream over there on the map at the bottom, there would be major impacts on marine life of all kinds. Africa, of course, is one of the most vulnerable continents because not only the impacts being much more serious in several parts of that continent, but also because there would be low adaptive capacity which exists right across the continent. So therefore, there are substantial risks to some of the poorest regions in the world, which obviously have implications for the entire planet. And here I'd like to remind you of something that a very distinguished economist, Kenneth Boulding, said. He said, we're all residents of spaceship Earth. And you know, for us to believe that we're safe, nothing's going to happen to us, is a very myopic view. It's much too short-sighted. And therefore, I think what we need to do is to look at some of the socio-economic implications of damage and destruction in any part of the globe, because that would have implications for all of us. Let me now turn to what can be done to meet the problem, to rebalance what we see as some kind of a perturbation in the climate system of the world. If you look at the top line of this particular table, if we want to stabilize temperature increase to between 2 and 2.4 degrees Celsius, then we would have to stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gases at the level that's shown over here. But the important thing to remember is that if we want to do this in a least cost manner, then CO2 emissions will need to peak no later than 2015. That's just 4 years away. So in other words, if we really want to pursue a least cost approach to stabilizing the Earth's climate, then we have a very limited and short window of opportunity. And this is where I think we need to bring about rapid change. If you look at the sources of emissions, as it happens, 60 to 80% of the emissions really come from energy supply and use in industrial processes. And yet, these are the areas where we're probably making the least progress. There are bright spots in several parts of the world, including this country. I mean, if you look at the record of California, and I was told, for instance, that in Iowa today, About 20% of the power generating capacity is in the form of wind energy capacity, essentially through the initiative of farmers who have installed these on their own land. Then there are bright spots on the horizon. But the important thing is we've got to bring about a dissemination of some of these technologies and what they can do. We need to make sure that we realize the core benefits of mitigation actions. And these core benefits are in the nature of energy security, much better health because of lower levels of air pollution, increased agricultural production, and certainly reduced pressure on natural ecosystems. We have carried out an assessment of renewable energy sources and climate change mitigation, and we brought out a special report in May of this year where we've identified what can be done in this area and where technology stands, the costs associated with it. And really speaking, responding to climate change involves an iterative risk management approach. You know, in business and industry, people take decisions based on information which is not always perfect. You don't know how well your investment is going to do in the future, yet people do it. In the case of climate change, the same kind of logic should apply. We know enough by which if we were to make investments in some of these mitigation technologies, we can minimize risk to human society, to everything on this planet, and all the species that exist. And I think it has to start with us. Gandhi said very rightly, you've got to be the change you want to see in the world. And invoking the spirit of Gandhi, I'd also like to say, we have to worry about some of the poorest regions in the world. Now here, let me put on my second hat. I'm also Director General of TERI, which is a large research institution employing about 1,000 people with a presence in several parts of the world. We have launched a major program called Lighting a Billion Lives, and I'd like to show you a little bit about that because this shows how you can bring about development, you can help people who are living in poverty and yet do it in a manner that is carbon friendly. So could we show the video, please? So I think if we work together and think out of the box, then I certainly think we can meet some of the greatest challenges facing humanity. And this is just a small example of what innovative thinking can do and action to bring about change among the poorest of the poor. Thank you very much. Thank you.